Boeing's 737 MAX is flying again. Hi there, thanks for joining us for Plain English, lesson number 333. I'm Jeff. JR is the producer, and this full lesson can be found at plainenglish.com/333. Coming up today, Boeing's troubled 737 MAX is back. The plane had been grounded for almost 2 years following deadly crashes in Asia and Africa. But the planes have new software and new training and have been approved to fly in 2 countries. The expression today is "in the eyes of," and on our video lesson, we'll talk about how to use the word besides to introduce a related point. That's a good one and available at plainenglish.com/333. 2 years after Boeing's 737 MAX was grounded for safety reasons, the modern, fuel-efficient regional jet is in the air again. You'll remember from lesson 139 that 2 737 MAX planes crashed within a short period of time, one in Indonesia and another in Ethiopia. Almost 350 people died in those crashes. Investigations later discovered that in certain cases, the plane's onboard computers were pushing the plane's nose downward just as pilots were trying to take off. The result was that the pilot, trying to point the plane up, was fighting the plane's own onboard computer, which was pushing the nose down. The pilots didn't have enough training on the software, so they didn't know how to override the computer. An investigation by worldwide aviation authorities discovered that Boeing employees had deceived regulators. Pilots would not need to undergo simulator training, the Boeing employees said, because the changes between the 737 MAX and previous 737s were not significant. Boeing didn't want pilots to need extensive training because it would make the planes seem more expensive in the eyes of their customers, the airlines. That deception was costly, and not just in lives lost or the blow to Boeing's reputation. Earlier this month, Boeing agreed to pay over $2 billion in fines and victim compensation. It also paused manufacturing and designed software and hardware modifications to make the existing 737 MAXes safe again. Prior to the plane's grounding, Boeing had delivered about 350 planes to airlines around the world. It then finished manufacturing over 450 more planes, but did not deliver them to airlines. That means about 800 planes need to be modified. Pilots also need to be trained thoroughly this time. So far, Brazil and the U.S. have approved the modified 737 MAX to fly again. The Brazilian airline Gol became the first air carrier to fly the new MAX in early December. That flight went between Sao Paulo and Porto Alegre. In the U.S., 4 carriers are set to fly the 737 MAX: American, United, Alaska, and Southwest. All carriers said they would tell passengers in advance that their flight would be aboard a 737 MAX, and any passenger would have the flexibility to change flights for no fee if they're uncomfortable. The first flight in the U.S. was on December 29th. It was operated by American Airlines and flew from Miami International Airport to New York's LaGuardia Airport. The pilot, Captain Sean Roski, said that the aircraft was a 737 MAX in his pre-flight announcements, and many people on the plane started applauding. Of course, with all the publicity, everyone on board the plane already knew. To boost confidence in the aircraft, Captain Roski's wife and the first officer's mother were both on board. Robert Isom, the president of American Airlines, was also on board. The top official at America's Federal Aviation Administration, Steve Dixon, took a test flight in September and said he had total confidence in the plane. It's not yet clear whether the public will trust the new 737s. The first flight leg was full of enthusiasts and airline employees. Many were on the flight just to say they were there. The return leg was different. People who took the return flight from New York to Miami were not as excited to be on a 737 MAX. Many were worried and were finding out for the first time at the gate. A public opinion poll showed that 57% of Americans would not want to fly on the new 737 MAX. Airlines are running a reduced schedule due to COVID, so they have the opportunity to reintroduce the plane gradually into their schedules, allowing customers to rebook at another time if they want. Travel by air is one of the safest ways to travel, so it's likely that after a few months of incident-free flying, the public will embrace the 737 MAX again. Besides, airlines have discovered the number one concern their customers have, and it isn't safety. It's finding the lowest price. I think I'd be comfortable on a 737 MAX. You've got to believe that this is the safest airplane in the sky. All eyes are on this plane and its safety record. The airlines, the pilots' unions, the regulators, Boeing itself, they all have too much at stake. I think I would be comfortable riding on one once I start flying again. I know we have pilots in the audience, and we have Brazilian pilots in the audience. So if you've got a perspective to share, the place to do that would be the Facebook group for listeners at plainenglish.com/Facebook. Today, we're going to talk about how to describe another person's perspective. We're going to talk about how to say how things look to another person. And the expression we're going to use is in the eyes of. In today's main lesson, we said that Boeing deceived regulators and their customers. Boeing said a few years back that their then new 737 MAX airplane would not require additional pilot training in a simulator. Pilots would just have to take some computer-based training, and then they could fly the plane. Why did Boeing do that? Well, before we go any further, this was obviously wrong, and it cost many lives and put many more people at risk. And I should also note that not everyone at Boeing was responsible for this deception. But the point remains that certain people at Boeing wanted their planes to be as easy to buy and operate as possible. They were imagining how their customers, the airlines, would be thinking. In the eyes of the airlines, additional pilot training on a simulator means additional costs. In the eyes of the airlines, a plane that requires pilot training on a simulator is more expensive than the sticker price because they need to invest that time and cost in the training. When we say in the eyes of, we mean to say from this person's point of view. From the airline's point of view, additional pilot training is expensive. Certain people at Boeing wanted their planes to appear cheaper and easier to operate. They wanted their planes to be attractive in the eyes of, or from the perspective of, the customers. Airline regulators have given the new 737 MAX their blessing. In the eyes of the regulators, the new plane is ready to go. They have probably scrutinized this plane more than any other plane in modern history just due to all the public pressure. So, in the eyes of the governments of Brazil and the United States, this plane is good to go. What about the public, though? In the eyes of the public, Boeing tried to cut corners, and 2 of its planes went down. The public may not be as quick to accept the new planes. We sometimes use in the eyes of when the same thing looks different to different people. To many people, Donald Trump was a disaster of a president, and he did lasting damage to the United States. In the eyes of his supporters, though, Trump was standing up for their beliefs against an out-of-touch elite. Same president, different perspective. Remember the lesson we did on too much tourism? Places like Venice and Barcelona are popular tourist attractions. Cheap rental apartments on Airbnb are attractive to visitors from around the world. It's great that so many people can experience these beautiful cities. In the eyes of the local residents, though, the tourists are not always a good thing. They crowd central cities, make noise late at night, and drive up rents. Same phenomenon, different perspective. If you're religious, Christian, and study the Bible, you might recognize the phrase, "in the eyes of the Lord." That means from God or from God's perspective. In the story of Noah's Ark, in the book of Genesis, 6th chapter, God believed the human race had become corrupted and only evil lived in the hearts of humans. Therefore, he would flood the entire earth and destroy every living thing on it. But Noah found favor in the eyes of the Lord. Noah had behaved well and was an exception from God's perspective. So Noah was instructed to go onto an ark, a big boat, with his family plus 2 of every kind of animal. There's one more specific example I want to share with you, and that is in the eyes of the law. That means according to the law. Here's a perfect example which I remember from my old driver's education classes. Let's say you go out to a bar or restaurant. Remember that? Well, let's pretend you have a few too many drinks. You drove to the bar, your car is there. You don't want to drive home because you've been drinking, but it's late. So you just go to your car, sit in the driver's seat, lock the doors, turn the engine on to get the heater going, and fall asleep. Guess what? You can be convicted for driving under the influence of alcohol. In the eyes of the law in some American states, that is the same as driving drunk. You don't have to have your foot on the pedal. If you're intoxicated and the car is on, even if you just turn the car on to warm up and go to sleep, that's the same as driving drunk in the eyes of the law in certain places. Is that right? I don't know. It's certainly not as dangerous as driving drunk, but a person's judgment is clouded when they're intoxicated. It's probably best not to be anywhere near the driver's seat of a car if you're intoxicated. But guess what? It doesn't matter what I personally think. An individual opinion doesn't count for much if the police show up. In the eyes of the law, again, in certain places, that's the same as actually operating the vehicle. Today's song of the week is Venus by the band Shocking Blue. I didn't recognize this song at first, not when I just looked at the title, but I bet you've heard it. The main line is, "I'm your Venus, I'm your fire, what's your desire?" The band is Dutch, and the song was released as a single in 1969. It was number 1 in 9 countries. Venus by the band Shocking Blue is JR's song of the week. And that is all for today's lesson. Congratulations on making it to the end. I still have not been on an airplane since COVID. I used to be on the road almost every week for work, and I remember my last flight. I was in Atlanta, coming home to Chicago. My company had just announced that all business travel was to be suspended and everyone had to come home. And I clearly remember stepping onto the plane thinking, this might be the last time I do this for a while. And here we are just about 10 months later. Crazy times. If you're ready to get 2021 off to a great start, why not consider Plain English Plus? It's a great way to upgrade your experience. If you ever find yourself unable to express an idea, if you feel like you just don't have enough tools in your English toolkit to get the job done, then I think you'd benefit from our membership, Plain English Plus. If that sounds like you, and if you're committed to improving English in 2021, then come join us at plainenglish.com/plus.